Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. In this episode, we're going to be doing one of my favorite Belgian French recipes, and the name of the recipe is croquettes. And if you're wondering what croquettes are, well, they are delicious, sumptuous mashed potatoes that are surrounded by breadcrumbs and fried to perfection. And yes, I know that we love our fried food here in America, so I'm pretty darn sure that you guys are gonna love this recipe. But now that I've talked about it for about 30-40 seconds, well, what are the ingredients that are needed in order to create these wonderful croquettes? Well, the ingredients needed are 4 potatoes, a 1/4 cup room temperature unsalted butter, a 1/2 cup of milk, 3 egg yellows and 3 egg whites, a pinch of salt, some pepper, some nutmeg, and some breadcrumbs. Now that we know the ingredients that are needed in order to create this wonderful recipe, well, let's start cooking. What we're going to start by doing is to take some potatoes and we're going to rinse them under some water. Once they have been rinsed thoroughly, then we can start peeling them. I like to use a potato peeler in order to peel my potatoes, but some more experienced cooks may want to do it with a knife. As I'm not the most experienced, at least with knives, the potato peeler works perfectly for me. Once the potatoes are peeled, take a pan and set it on the stove to medium-high. Once the water starts boiling, put the potatoes in the pan and let them boil until they are soft but not too soft. A good trick in order to know when they are ready is to stick a knife in the potato. If it goes in easily, the potatoes are done. Now that we've boiled the potatoes, comes the fun part. Well, it is to actually mash those potatoes. And what I like to do in order to mash them is to use a little tool that's kind of like this, and it really makes it much simpler to mash these potatoes. With a potato masher, mashing the potatoes really is a breeze and shouldn't take too long. Once the initial mash is done, feel free to add a bit of salt, some pepper, and a bit of nutmeg. I'm usually pretty generous on the pepper, but that's my personal taste. Once all the spices are in the bowl, take some room temperature unsalted butter and cut a 1/4 cup of it. Add that 1/4 cup of butter to the bowl, mix it in briefly, then set the bowl to the side. For the next step, take 3 whole eggs and separate the egg whites from the egg yellows. It always seems a little tricky when first breaking the egg, but the white and yellow of the egg do separate pretty easily. Then take the initial bowl back and put the 3 egg yellows into the bowl, followed by 1/2 cup of milk. For the milk, it can be either oat milk or regular milk. Both work well for the mashed potato mix. Once the milk is poured inside the bowl, mix all the ingredients briefly one more time. Now that the mashed potatoes are made, you may be wondering, well, how do we get the croquette shape? Well, there is a trick to it. I use a piping bag, and by using the piping bag, I can make really nice rows of mashed potatoes that then I can actually freeze in the freezer, and that'll pretty much be the shape of the croquette. So as you can see, this is a pretty darn simple recipe. Before making the lines of mashed potatoes, I like to take a dish and cover it with aluminum wrap. Once the plate is covered fully, take the piping bag and fill it up with mashed potatoes. Then simply make long lines of potatoes on the plate. If you run out of space on the plate, feel free to use a second plate. I do feel that covering the plate in aluminum is important because it helps keep the potatoes detached from the actual plate itself and makes for an easier cut later on. I think that using the piping bag in order to make the croquette shape truly is the funnest part of the recipe. But now that we've had fun, well, comes the hardest part, and it's putting the potato plate in the freezer for 2 hours. Yeah, you heard me, 2 hours. Well, the reason that we're putting it for so long in the freezer is because we want the mashed potatoes to become semi-frozen, because after taking it out of the freezer, we're going to need to cut it and also bread it before we can fry it. And if it's soft and room temperature, well, it is mashed potatoes. It's not going to work. So yeah, we're going to have to put it in the freezer. After around 2 hours in the freezer, take the plate out of it and then with a knife cut the potato strips in croquette-sized shapes. There's no real rule as to how long the croquettes should be, but as a general rule, they should be pretty homogeneous in size. After all, we are trying to make the plate somewhat pretty. Now that the croquette shapes are cut, take some flour, the 3 remaining egg whites, and some breadcrumbs, and then set them next to each other in separate bowls. This process takes a little bit of time as we have to cover each and every croquette with flour, egg white, and breadcrumbs. Didn't I tell you guys that this recipe was super duper simple? And yeah, you probably guessed it. This recipe is almost done. All that's really left is to fry these bad boys, and then we'll be able to eat them. But I did want to give you guys one last tip before we actually go ahead with the frying, and it is to use peanut oil in order to fry these croquettes. You could also use vegetable oil, but I wouldn't use olive oil because, well, olive oil doesn't get as hot as peanut oil or vegetable oil, and we want the type of oil that gets really, really hot. It just makes the frying much better and much simpler, and the peanut oil also gives it that little extra taste. Now that we have the peanut oil, set the oven to high and let the oil get hot. If you don't have a thermostat to check the oil temperature, a simple trick to know if the oil is ready for frying is to dunk a wooden spoon in the oil. If there are bubbles forming around the wooden spoon, then the oil is ready for frying. As for the croquette frying, I suggest to put a couple of croquettes at a time and not the whole plate at once. Since it's oil after all, you have to be careful dunking stuff inside it. Gently dropping them in is key. Once in the oil, the frying is super fast and usually takes less than a minute. Just keep an eye out for a nice golden outside layer. When they do reach that point, use a metal skimmer spoon to take the croquettes out of the pan and then set them on a plate that is covered with kitchen paper. Wow, these croquettes came out super sublime. They are exactly how I remember them in Belgium or in France when I buy them in a supermarket or they serve them to me in a restaurant. And yeah, this recipe seemed complicated in my head before I made it, but now that I know how to make croquettes, I'm super happy that I'm able to share this recipe with you guys because it's super duper simple. And yeah, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, leave me a comment too, let me know how your croquette making came out. I'm pretty darn sure it came out super duper good. But with that being said, have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next video.